You think public failure exposes your weakness, but what it exposes is where you gave authority away. What disturbs you is not the failure itself, but the moment control left your hands and you followed it outward. The audience, the outcome, the judgment, none of these ever belonged to you. Yet your reaction suggests you treated them as if they did. That is the real fracture. Public failure feels severe because it removes the illusion that you can manage how you are seen. But the disturbance does not come from being seen. It comes from having tied your judgment to that visibility. The event only reveals the structure already in place. So the question is not why failure feels painful. The question is, what did you believe was yours to control that never was? Examine where you placed your authority before the moment exposed it. The first mistake is subtle. You treat the reaction of others as if it were part of your own domain. You do not say it directly, but your response reveals it. You feel exposed, diminished, unsettled, as if something of yours has been taken or damaged. But nothing that belongs to your ruling faculty has been touched. What belongs to you is narrower and more precise: your judgment about the event, your assent to the impression, your chosen response. That is the full extent of your authority. The outcome of the attempt, the interpretation of the audience, the permanence of reputation, these are not yours. They never were. Public failure appears violent because it disrupts the illusion that these externals can be managed. You thought you could guide how you are seen. You thought you could secure a certain image. When the result contradicts that expectation, the mind reacts as if control has been lost. But control was never there to begin with. The disturbance grows from this confusion. You do not only experience the event, you add a claim to it. You say, without saying, "This should not have happened to me," or "They should not see me this way." That statement carries an assumption of ownership over what lies outside your authority. Once that assumption is in place, frustration becomes inevitable. Consider the structure clearly. An action was taken. An outcome followed. Others formed impressions. None of these steps required your permission. Yet you experience them as violations. Why? Because you assigned them a status they do not possess. You treated them as extensions of yourself rather than conditions you must navigate. This is where effort becomes misdirected. Instead of examining your judgment, you attempt to repair the external. You replay the event. You imagine how it should have unfolded. You anticipate how others now see you. All of this labor is applied to what does not belong to you. And so it produces no stability. The boundary is not philosophical decoration. It is operational. If you do not draw it correctly, every reaction will lean outward. You will measure yourself by response, not by reason. You will attempt to correct perception instead of correcting judgment. And the cycle will repeat. Public failure does not create this confusion. It exposes it. It shows you exactly where you extended your sense of ownership beyond its proper limit. The event becomes uncomfortable not because it is severe, but because it removes your ability to maintain the illusion quietly. So the task is not to avoid such moments. The task is to see, with precision, what remains yours even when everything external turns against your expectation. Your judgment remains. Your assent remains. Your capacity to respond remains. Nothing else is required for stability. And yet, knowing this boundary does not automatically change your reaction. The disturbance continues. Which means the error is not only in what you claim, but in how you agree to what appears. That mechanism must be examined next. The second error is less visible, but more decisive. You assume that what appears to the mind is already true. The event happens. An impression forms immediately: this is bad. This ruins me. They now see me differently. That impression arrives quickly, without effort. But it is not yet a judgment. There is a gap here, though it is often too brief to notice. The impression presents itself. Then something else occurs, you agree with it. That agreement is assent. It is the moment the mind says, yes, this is exactly what it means. And once that agreement is given, the reaction hardens. Public failure does not force this assent. It presents material. The mind completes the structure. You see a room fall silent, and the impression arises, they are judging me. That may or may not be accurate. But accuracy is not yet the problem. The problem begins when the mind accepts the impression as a final verdict. It does not pause. It does not examine. It consents. From that consent, the rest follows with consistency. Shame appears. Urgency appears. The need to correct, to defend, to withdraw. All of these are not direct products of the event. They are consequences of the agreement that the event has a specific meaning. This is why the disturbance feels immediate. The time between impression and assent is short. It feels like one movement. But it is not one movement. It is two. And the second belongs to you. You cannot prevent impressions from arriving. The body reacts. The mind produces interpretations. This is natural. But the discipline does not begin at the level of appearance. It begins at the level of endorsement. If the mind says, "This is humiliation," and you do not examine that claim, you have already surrendered authority. Not to the audience, but to the impression itself. You have allowed it to define reality without question. And yet, nothing in the event contains that definition. The event contains action, outcome, visibility. The meaning is added afterward. It is constructed through assent. This is where the confusion deepens. You believe you are reacting to what happened. In truth, you are reacting to what you have agreed that it means. The difference is small in language, but large in consequence. If the impression is not examined, it becomes indistinguishable from fact. You no longer say, "It appears this way." You say, "It is this way." And once that shift occurs, resistance begins. You fight the event, not because of its structure, but because of the meaning you have attached to it. Public failure, then, is not only a test of outcome. It is a test of whether you can detect this moment of agreement. Whether you can see that the mind moves too quickly from appearance to conclusion. Most do not see it. They experience the conclusion as inevitable. But inevitability is an illusion created by speed. The faster the ascent, the more natural it feels. The more natural it feels, the less it is questioned. So the work is not to eliminate impressions. It is to slow the movement that follows them. To recognize that between what appears and what you accept, there is a space. And that space is where responsibility remains intact. Understanding this does not yet change your behavior. It only reveals the mechanism. You now see where the disturbance is formed. But seeing the mechanism is not the same as being able to govern it under pressure. That requires training. And without it, recognition collapses the moment intensity rises. Seeing the mechanism does not mean you can interrupt it. In the moment of exposure, the speed of impression and ascent compresses again. You understand the structure in calm conditions, but under pressure, the old pattern resumes. This is where the idea of discipline is often misunderstood. Discipline is not force applied at the peak of reaction. It is not an act of suppression once the mind is already carried away. If you wait until the impression has already hardened into judgment, you are no longer training, you are reacting late. The work must begin earlier. It must shape how the mind receives impressions before they demand agreement. This is why discipline, in this context, is repetition. Not repetition of outcomes, but repetition of examination. The mind must become accustomed to pausing, even slightly, before it consents. That pause is not natural at first. It must be built. Without training, the mind treats impressions as commands. With training, it begins to treat them as proposals. Public failure exposes whether this distinction exists in you. When the moment arrives, do you immediately agree with what appears, or is there even a brief resistance? That resistance is not denial. It is inspection. You do not say, "This is not happening." You say, this is appearing, but what is it? That question delays assent. And that delay preserves authority. Most people attempt discipline as correction after the fact. They replay the event and try to reinterpret it. But this is reconstruction, not training. The structure that produced the reaction remains unchanged. So the next event produces the same outcome. Real training is quieter. It happens before any audience is present. It happens in small, ordinary impressions where the stakes are low. A delay, a minor inconvenience, a moment of irritation, these are the places where assent can be observed and adjusted. If you cannot pause in a minor disturbance, you will not pause in public failure. The scale of the event does not create discipline. It reveals whether discipline was already present. This removes the illusion that strength appears in decisive moments. Strength is built in unnoticed ones. The mind learns, slowly, that not every impression requires agreement. That not every appearance carries authority. Over time, this changes the speed of your inner movement. The gap between impression and assent becomes slightly wider. Not large, not dramatic, but enough to intervene. That intervention is the only place where freedom begins to take form. Not in controlling the event. Not in managing perception. But in refusing immediate submission to what appears. And yet, this training is not about achieving perfect control. The mind will still move quickly. It will still agree too soon at times. Discipline does not remove error. It reduces the frequency and the depth of unexamined agreement. This is why it cannot be built through intensity. It cannot rely on motivation, or pressure, or a desire to prove something. Those are themselves impressions that can be misinterpreted. Discipline must be quieter than that. It must be consistent. So the question shifts again. Not why did I fail publicly? Not even why did I react this way? But have I trained the mind to examine what appears before it agrees? If the answer is no, then the outcome was secondary. The reaction was predictable. And if the answer begins to become yes, even slightly, then the same external event will not carry the same internal consequence. What remains, then, is not theory, but application. The structure is clear. The training is defined. The only question left is whether it can be carried into ordinary moments, where it either becomes real or remains conceptual. Understanding must now take form in action, or it remains unused. The structure is already clear, impression arrives, assent follows, reaction stabilizes. If this sequence is not interrupted in real time, it will repeat without modification. So the question becomes practical: what do you do when the moment actually arrives? The first action is recognition. Not after the reaction, but at its beginning. When the body tightens, when the mind begins to construct meaning, you do not follow it immediately. You name it correctly: this is an impression. That statement is not decorative. It creates distance. It separates appearance from conclusion. Without this separation, everything that follows feels justified. With it, the process slows just enough to allow examination. The second action is refusal of immediate agreement. Not denial, not suppression, but delay. You do not accept the first interpretation as final. You allow it to remain incomplete. The mind will push for closure: this is bad. This defines me. This must be corrected. You do not accept these statements at once. You hold them in suspension. This suspension is uncomfortable. The mind prefers certainty, even if the certainty is harmful. But remaining in that uncertainty is part of the training. It prevents premature assent. The third action is clarification of what actually occurred. Strip the event of added meaning. Something happened. It was visible. It did not match expectation. That is the structure. Everything beyond that is interpretation layered on top. If you cannot describe the event without adding evaluation, you have already moved past examination. So the task is precise: describe first, interpret later. The fourth action is returning the boundary. Ask directly, what here belongs to me? Not as a general question, but as an immediate filter. Your response belongs to you. Your judgment belongs to you. The perception of others does not. The outcome does not. The permanence of reputation does not. This question redirects effort. It prevents the mind from investing in correction where correction is not possible. The fifth action is correction after movement has already begun. Because often, you will not catch the impression in time. You will agree too quickly. The reaction will form. In that case, the work is not lost. It simply moves later. You revisit the moment, not to relive it, but to examine where assent occurred. Where did the mind say yes without inspection? That point becomes visible. And once visible, it becomes trainable. This review is not for self-criticism. It is for accuracy. If it becomes accusation, it turns into another unexamined judgment. So the tone must remain controlled. You are not condemning the reaction. You are locating its origin. These actions are not separate techniques. They are variations of one discipline, refusing to allow appearance to become authority without examination. They must be practiced where the stakes are small. A delay in response. A minor embarrassment. A moment of irritation. Each of these is a training ground. If ignored, they accumulate into habit. If examined, they begin to change the structure. Public failure does not require a different method. It requires the same method under greater pressure. And that pressure reveals whether the practice has been internalized or only understood. So the aim is not to prepare for dramatic moments. It is to build a consistent response to ordinary ones. Because the mind does not change its behavior based on importance. It repeats what it has practiced. If the practice is present, the reaction shifts. Not completely, not instantly, but measurably. The impression still arrives. But it no longer commands immediate agreement. There is space. And within that space, authority returns. From there, the final question becomes unavoidable. What does it mean to live with that authority consistently, not occasionally? What changes, if the discipline holds, is not the world around you. It is the location of authority within you. Public failure will still occur. Outcomes will still diverge from intention. Others will still form judgments without your consent. None of this is altered by practice. The external field remains unstable, unpredictable, and indifferent to your preference. If your idea of freedom depends on stabilizing that field, it will never arrive. Freedom, in this structure, is narrower. It is the reduction of how easily your ruling faculty is captured by what appears. Not the removal of impressions, but the weakening of their authority. Not the elimination of reaction, but the refusal to treat reaction as command. Before discipline, the sequence is immediate. Event, impression, assent, reaction, compressed into one movement. After discipline, the sequence remains, but its force changes. The impression still arrives, but it does not carry automatic permission. The mind does not submit as quickly. There is hesitation, even if brief. That hesitation is not weakness. It is control returning to its proper place. You begin to notice something precise. The same external situation produces a different internal effect. Not because the situation improved, but because the agreement changed. What once felt like damage now appears as information. What once triggered urgency now invites examination. This does not make you indifferent in the sense of being numb. It makes you selective in what you accept as binding. You feel the moment, but you do not immediately obey it. This is where sovereignty becomes visible. Not in comfort, not in confidence, but in the consistency of your response. You are no longer dragged outward by every visible outcome. You remain oriented inward, where judgment is formed and corrected. And yet, this state is not permanent. It does not lock into place. It must be maintained. The mind does not stop producing impressions. It does not stop proposing interpretations. If attention weakens, old patterns return. Assent becomes faster again. The boundary blurs. So freedom is not a possession. It is a maintained condition. It exists only while the discipline is active. Public failure, then, becomes diagnostic rather than destructive. It shows you, without distortion, how stable your authority is. Not in theory, but in contact with pressure. It removes the quiet conditions in which weak discipline can appear sufficient. It forces exposure. If the mind collapses into immediate agreement, the failure reveals that training is incomplete. If the mind pauses, even briefly, the same event reveals that something has changed. In this way, the event itself loses its central position. It becomes secondary. What matters is not what occurred, but how the ruling faculty met it. This reorders the entire experience. You no longer measure yourself by outcome or reception. You measure by the clarity and steadiness of your judgment, by whether you examined what appeared, or surrendered to it. Nothing in this guarantees ease. It does not protect you from discomfort, from missteps, from visible error. But it removes a deeper instability, the constant dependence on what you cannot govern. And that is the only form of stability that can persist. Do not look for a final state where this work is finished. Look instead for whether, in each encounter, you return to the same point, the moment before assent, where authority is still yours. Public failure does not injure your authority. It reveals where you placed it incorrectly. The event itself carries no verdict. It is your judgment, your assent, your interpretation that turns it into disturbance. What appears in front of others is not the same as what is decided within you. That distinction remains the central task. The mistake is not that failure occurred. The mistake is that you treated outcome, perception, and reputation as if they belonged to your control. From that error, every reaction follows with consistency. Remove that error, and the structure changes, even if the event does not. The work, then, is not to avoid exposure or secure better results. It is to examine what appears before agreeing to it. To slow the movement from impression to assent. To return responsibility to where it has always been, your ruling faculty. You will not do this perfectly. The mind will still move quickly. It will still accept appearances too soon. That is not a reason to abandon the discipline. It is the reason to continue it. Correction is not a single act. It is a maintained practice. So when failure happens again, and it will, the question remains the same. Not what they saw. Not what it means for your image. But whether you examined what appeared, or surrendered to it. Return to what is yours to govern.